In the outskirts of rural Montana, where rolling hills met endless sky, Thomas Miller tended to his modest farm just as he had for the past 40 years. At 73, his weathered hands still worked the soil with practiced care, though perhaps a bit slower than in his youth. The evening sun cast long shadows across his fields when the first strange lights appeared in the darkening sky. Thomas initially mistook them for shooting stars, but their erratic movement caught his attention. Through his old binoculars, he watched as what appeared to be two vessels engaged in a desperate chase. The smaller ship, sleek and silver, trailed smoke as it careened through the atmosphere. The larger vessel, dark and angular, pursued relentlessly, firing bursts of energy that lit up the twilight. "Good Lord in heaven," Thomas whispered, his hands trembling as he watched the smaller ship take a direct hit. It spiraled downward, trailing fire and debris, before crashing into the dense forest that bordered his property. The pursuing vessel circled once, like a vulture confirming its kill, before ascending rapidly and vanishing into the night sky. For a moment, Thomas stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he'd witnessed. Common sense told him to call the authorities, but something deeper, an instinct honed by years of helping stranded travelers and injured wildlife, pushed him to act. Grabbing his first aid kit, flashlight, and trusty pickup truck, he headed toward the column of smoke rising from the woods. The crash site was a scene of devastation. Trees lay splintered and scorched, and a deep furrow marked where the ship had plowed through the earth. The vessel itself was surprisingly intact, though its silvery surface was scarred and buckled. As Thomas approached cautiously, a section of the hull retracted with a hydraulic hiss. Inside, he found something that changed his world forever. A female figure lay unconscious in what appeared to be a pilot's seat. Her skin was a pale lavender, and delicate, iridescent scales covered her exposed arms. She was humanoid but unmistakably alien, and she was badly injured. "Hold on there, young lady," Thomas murmured, pushing aside his shock to focus on helping. "Let's get you somewhere safe." As he carefully assessed her injuries, her eyes fluttered open, striking amber orbs with vertical pupils. She recoiled in fear, trying to speak in a language of musical tones and clicks. "Easy now," Thomas soothed, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "I'm here to help." He pointed to himself, then mimed bandaging wounds. The alien's expression shifted from fear to desperate hope as she realized his intentions. Using his limited medical supplies and plenty of improvisation, Thomas managed to stabilize her most serious injuries. When he determined it was safe to move her, he helped her into his truck. The alien was surprisingly light, her bones seeming almost hollow, like a bird's. Back at his farmhouse, Thomas converted his guest room into a makeshift medical ward. Over the next few days, he tended to his extraordinary patient with the same quiet dedication he showed his crops. He named her Aurora, after the way her scales shimmered in the light, though he knew that wasn't her real name. Aurora proved to be a quick learner. Within a week, she had picked up enough English to communicate basic needs. Through a combination of words, gestures, and drawings, she began to tell her story. She was a scientist, part of a peaceful exploration mission. Her people, the Lissari, had encountered a hostile species called the Vrek, who saw any advanced civilization as a potential threat to be eliminated. The Vrek had already destroyed several Lissari outposts. Aurora had been trying to reach Earth to warn humanity of the impending danger when she was shot down. The thought that she had failed her mission seemed to cause her more pain than her physical injuries. "Not failed," Thomas assured her, setting down a bowl of homemade soup. "Found ally instead." He had picked up a habit of simplified speech. Aurora's mandible plates, what passed for her cheeks, flushed a deeper purple as she smiled. As Aurora recovered, Thomas found himself sharing more about his own life. He told her about his late wife, Sarah, who had loved the stars and would have been thrilled beyond measure to meet an actual alien. He spoke of his children, now grown and living in distant cities, too busy with their own lives to visit often. One evening, as they sat on his porch watching the sunset, Aurora suddenly stiffened. Her head tilted, and Thomas recognized her listening pose. "Ships," she said brinly. "Wreck ships. Coming." In the distance, dark shapes appeared against the dying light. Thomas stood, his jaw set with determination. "Then we better get ready. This is my home, and you under my protection now." He might be just one old farmer, but he had spent a lifetime working this land, and he knew every hill, hollow, and hiding place. As the wreck ships drew closer, Thomas Miller prepared to defend not just his alien friend, but his entire planet. Sometimes the fate of worlds turns not on grand armies or advanced technology, but on simple human kindness and courage. The wreck ships descended like dark thunderclouds, their engines humming with menace. Thomas watched them from his barn window, where he and Aurora had taken shelter among hay bales and farm equipment. His mind raced with an audacious plan, one that would either save them or get them both killed. "Your people," Thomas whispered to Aurora. "They have any weaknesses, anything they can't handle." Aurora's scales rippled with concentration as she processed his question. "Heat," she replied softly. "Wreck homeworld, cold. Their systems, their suits, not good with high temperature." She pointed to Thomas's ancient tractor. "Their scanners cannot see through old machines. Too much metal interference." Thomas's weathered face broke into a grin. "Well now, isn't that interesting?" He had spent decades jury-rigging farm equipment, keeping ancient machines running long past their prime. Now those skills might just save their lives, and possibly the planet. Working quickly, they transformed the barn into a maze of improvised defenses. Thomas's collection of old tractors, combines, and rusty equipment created a web of scanner interference. Aurora modified some of her ship's damaged components, creating crude but effective heat projectors from spare parts and Thomas's welding equipment. The first wrecked soldiers approached cautiously. Through gaps in the barn walls, Thomas observed them, tall, armored figures with insectoid features visible through their helmet visors. They moved with military precision, but something in their stance suggested uncertainty. This wasn't the resistance they had expected. "Remember," Thomas murmured to Aurora, "just like we practiced." She nodded, her amber eyes gleaming with determination. The old farmer had taught her something his grandfather had taught him: the art of hunting by leading your target right where you want them. The wreck reached the barn's main entrance. Thomas held his breath, counting silently. 1, 2, 3, now. He yanked a lever, and several things happened at once. The barn doors slammed shut behind the intruders. Ancient irrigation pipes, repurposed and hidden in the rafters, sprayed superheated steam. Aurora's modified heat projectors activated, turning the barn's interior into a sweltering furnace. The effect was immediate and devastating. The wrecked soldiers' environmental suits began to malfunction, their movements becoming erratic. Several tried to shoot their way out, but their energy weapons only added to the heat. Through the chaos, Thomas and Aurora stayed hidden in their shielded alcove, protected by layers of heat-reflecting materials salvaged from Aurora's ship. "Second wave coming," Aurora warned, monitoring a device from her crash. "More careful now. They learn." Thomas nodded, already moving to phase 2 of their plan. They had known the first trick wouldn't work twice. Outside, more wreck troops approached, this time spreading out to surround the barn. But Thomas Miller hadn't spent 73 years farming this land without learning every inch of it. As the aliens advanced, they failed to notice the subtle signs of disturbed earth beneath their feet. Thomas reached for another lever. "My daddy always said good irrigation is the key to farming," he said with a grim smile. "Course, he never thought I'd use it quite like this." The ground beneath the wreck suddenly turned to mud as hidden pipes released thousands of gallons of water. The aliens, adapted to their cold, rocky homeworld, found themselves sinking into the earth. Their heavy armor, designed for combat in space, now worked against them. Several disappeared up to their waists in the sudden quagmire. But the wreck commander was no fool. From their ship hovering above, they began systematically bombing the fields, trying to flush out their quarry. Thomas watched years of careful cultivation being destroyed, his heart aching, but his resolve never wavering. "They're getting desperate," he observed. "Making mistakes." Aurora nodded, understanding. The wreck were used to overwhelming force and quick victories. This prolonged resistance from what should have been an easy target was rattling them. Through the smoke and chaos, Thomas caught glimpses of lights in the distance, red and blue flashing lights. Despite his initial instinct to handle things alone, he had made one crucial call before the attack began. His old friend Sheriff Martinez was coming, and with her, every law enforcement officer in 3 counties. "Your people think humans are primitive," Thomas told Aurora as they prepared for their final gambit. "That's why they attacked you first, isn't it? Thought we'd be easy to eliminate once they dealt with the Lazari." Aurora's scales flickered with emotion. "Yes, Vrek think, technology only strength, cannot understand other kinds of power." Thomas checked his watch. The timing had to be perfect. "Well, they're about to learn something about human ingenuity. And something else too. Nobody messes with my farm." As night fell over the Montana countryside, the real battle was about to begin. Thomas Miller, an old farmer armed with nothing but wit, determination, and decades of agricultural experience, was about to teach the Vrek a lesson about underestimating both humanity and the bond between 2 unlikely friends. Sheriff Elena Martinez had seen many strange things in her 20 years of law enforcement, but nothing could have prepared her for the sight that greeted her as she crested the hill to Miller's farm. The night sky blazed with otherworldly lights, and what appeared to be honest-to-God alien ships hovered over Thomas's property. "All units, hold position," she commanded into her radio, her voice steady despite the surreal situation. "And someone get me the National Guard on the line." Around her, dozens of police vehicles formed a perimeter, their occupants watching in stunned silence as Thomas Miller's agricultural knowledge turned his farm into a battlefield. Inside the defended perimeter, Thomas and Aurora were executing the riskiest part of their plan. They had retreated to the old grain silo, modified now, with Aurora's technical expertise, into something that would have made NASA engineers proud. "Nitrogen fertilizer tanks in position?" Thomas asked, checking a jury-rigged display of tractor gauges and alien tech. Aurora confirmed with a nod, her fingers dancing over salvage controls from her ship. "Ready, but Thomas," she hesitated, her scales dimming with concern. "This plan, very dangerous, could kill us both." The old farmer's eyes crinkled with determination. "Sometimes you've got to risk the whole crop to save the farm, dear." He patted her shoulder gently. "Besides, I promised to protect you, and Thomas Miller keeps his promises." The Vrek forces had regrouped after their earlier setbacks, learning to avoid the saturated ground and maintaining their distance from the barn's heat traps. Their commander, frustrated by the unexpected resistance, had ordered a final assault. Troops advanced from multiple directions while their ships maintained a blocking position overhead. "Now," Thomas commanded as the first wave of Vrek soldiers reached the predetermined point. Aurora activated their improvised defense system, and years' worth of stored nitrogen fertilizer erupted from underground pipes in a pressurized spray. The freezing liquid caught the Vrek troops by surprise, coating their armor in a thick layer of frost. But this was just the beginning. Thomas had spent decades understanding the chemical properties of every substance on his farm. As the nitrogen fertilizer reacted with other compounds they carefully positioned, it created a rapidly expanding foam that hardened almost instantly in the cold. Vrek soldiers found themselves trapped, their movements restricted by the rapidly solidifying substance. Their cold-adapted armor, already taxed by the earlier heat attacks, began to malfunction under the extreme temperature fluctuations. "Sheriff Martinez," Thomas called over the old CB radio he kept in his truck. "Now would be a good time for that backup you mentioned." The response was immediate. National Guard helicopters appeared over the horizon, their spotlights illuminating the chaos below. The wrecked ships, suddenly faced with organized military resistance, began to pull back. But the alien commander wasn't finished. Their flagship turned its main weapons toward the silo, preparing to eliminate the source of their humiliation. Thomas and Aurora watched the massive energy weapon charging, its light casting ominous shadows. "Ready for the grand finale?" Thomas asked, his hand on the final lever. Aurora gripped his other hand, her alien features set with human-like determination. "Together," she said firmly. Thomas pulled the lever, activating their last and most ambitious trap. The silo's dome split open like a flower blooming, revealing a collection of mirrors salvaged from Aurora's ship, arranged in a precise pattern. As the wreck weapon fired, the mirrors caught its energy beam, splitting and redirecting it. The redirected energy scattered into dozens of smaller beams, each striking a different point on the wrecked ships. The aliens, expecting their superior firepower to prevail, hadn't prepared for their own weapon to be used against them. Their shields, calibrated for large-scale attacks, couldn't adapt to multiple smaller points of impact. The wrecked flagship's engines sputtered and failed, forcing it to retreat. The remaining ground forces, seeing their support vanish and finding themselves surrounded by human military forces, surrendered. For the first time in their history, the wreck had been defeated not by superior technology, but by simple human farming knowledge combined with alien science. As the National Guard moved in to secure the alien prisoners, Thomas and Aurora emerged from the silo. Sheriff Martinez rushed to meet them, her expression a mix of disbelief and admiration. "Thomas Miller," she said, shaking her head. "When you called saying you needed help with some unwanted visitors, I thought you meant teenagers messing with your crops again." Thomas chuckled, brushing brain dust from his overalls. "Well, Elena, sometimes hospitality means knowing both how to welcome guests and how to deal with those who don't mind their manners." Aurora stepped forward, her presence causing several officers to step back in surprise. But when she spoke, her carefully learned English carried a warmth that transcended her alien appearance. "Thomas showed all of us, that strength not always in weapons. Sometimes in here," she touched her chest, over her heart. "And in here." She tapped her head, human wisdom, more powerful than wrecked technology. As dawn broke over the battlefield that had once been a peaceful farm, Thomas surveyed the damage with a farmer's practiced eye. Fields would need to be replanted, fences mended, and equipment repaired. But as he watched human and alien authorities working together to secure the scene, he knew that something more important had grown from this soil, the seeds of understanding between two worlds. Word of the battle at Miller's farm spread quickly, though government agencies did their best to contain the story. Within days, the quiet Montana property became the unlikely center of interstellar diplomacy. Military tents and research stations dotted the fields where corn had once grown, and scientists worked alongside farmers to understand the hybrid technology that had defeated the wreck. Thomas took it all in stride, continuing his daily chores even as high-ranking officials and alien diplomats gathered in his kitchen. Aurora had become his constant companion, helping him repair fences and tend to the surviving crops when she wasn't acting as a liaison between humans and the arriving Lissari representatives. "Your coffee is quite remarkable," commented Ambassador Corell, a senior Lissari diplomat who had arrived in response to Aurora's presence. The alien's scales shimmered with pleasure as she sipped from one of Thomas's chipped mugs. "Much like your species, seemingly simple, yet surprisingly complex." Thomas smiled, pouring another cup. "Simple doesn't mean weak, Ambassador. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most elegant." He glanced out his window at the field where wrecked prisoners were helping to rebuild under careful supervision. Sometimes folks just need to be shown a better way. The defeat at Miller's farm had shaken the wreck's confidence in their superiority. Their prisoners, treated with firm but humane care, were experiencing something new, respect earned through cooperation rather than fear. Several had begun asking questions about human agriculture, fascinated by how Thomas had turned their weaknesses against them. Never seen anything like it, remarked Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead xenobiologist studying the wreck. Their entire society was built on the principle of technological dominance. But here they are, learning to plant tomatoes with a 73-year-old farmer. Aurora watched from the porch as Thomas demonstrated proper soil preparation to a group of wreck workers. Their naturally rigid postures had softened, their insectoid features showing what she now recognized as curiosity. Thomas teaches, understanding, she said, not just farming, shows respect for land, for life, different from wreck way. The impact of these changes reached far beyond Earth. News of the wreck defeat spread through the galaxy, but it wasn't the military aspect that captured attention. Instead, stories circulated about how a human farmer had not only defeated the dreaded wreck, but was now teaching them a new way of life. One evening, as Thomas and Aurora sat on the porch watching the sunset, now joined by both human and alien friends, a peculiar request arrived. A young wreck, one who had participated in the initial attack, asked to speak with Thomas. Elder Miller, the wreck began, using their culture's term of respect. Our leaders have reviewed the events here. They wish to propose an exchange, knowledge for knowledge. We would learn your agricultural techniques, and in return, share our understanding of cold climate farming. Thomas leaned back in his rocking chair, considering. Knowledge freely shared grows like well-tended crops, he said finally. I'd be happy to teach what I know, and learn what you can show me. The wreck's antennae quivered with what Aurora recognized as relief and gratitude. As weeks passed, Thomas's farm transformed into something unprecedented, an interstellar agricultural research station. Lysari scientists worked alongside wreck engineers, combining their technologies with human farming wisdom. The results were extraordinary. Hybrid crops that could grow in extreme conditions, irrigation systems that conserved water with almost magical efficiency, and new understandings of soil chemistry that promised to revolutionize farming across multiple worlds. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was in the wreck themselves. The species that had once sought to dominate through force began to see the power of cultivation, not just of crops, but of relationships and understanding. Their rigid hierarchy slowly gave way to a more cooperative structure, inspired by the human model they witnessed on Thomas's farm. You know, Thomas said to Aurora one evening, as they watched a wrecked child carefully planting seedlings under the guidance of its parent, my father used to say that farming teaches patience. You can't force a plant to grow, you have to understand it, care for it, give it what it needs to thrive. Aurora nodded, her scales glowing softly in the twilight. Like peace, she agreed. Cannot force, must grow naturally, need right conditions, careful tending. Sheriff Martinez, now a regular visitor to the farm, joined them on the porch. Never thought I'd see the day when alien spaceships would be parked next to tractors, she mused, or when interstellar peace would start with a lesson in crop rotation. Thomas chuckled, pouring coffee for his friends, the simple gesture that had become a symbol of shared understanding across species. Life has a way of surprising you. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest seeds. As night fell over the farm, lights twinkled both from the stars above and the various research stations below. In the fields, humans worked alongside their former enemies, planting hope for a future none of them could have imagined just months before. And at the center of it all, an old farmer continued to do what he had always done, nurturing growth, fostering understanding, and showing that the simplest wisdom often holds the deepest truths. 6 months after the battle that changed the galaxy, Thomas's farm hosted its first interstellar harvest festival. The autumn air buzzed with an extraordinary mix of human laughter, Lysari song, and the rhythmic clicking of pleased wreck. Fields that had once been scorched by combat now burst with experimental crops developed through the collaboration of 3 species. In the center of the celebration, Thomas supervised the unveiling of their most ambitious project yet, a revolutionary greenhouse system that could replicate any world's growing conditions. The structure gleamed with a combination of wreck cooling technology, Lysari light manipulation, and good old-fashioned human agricultural knowledge. "Watch this," Thomas said, adjusting a control panel that would have looked at home in both a barn and a spaceship. With a few taps, one section of the greenhouse transformed to match the frigid conditions of the Vrek homeworld, while another mimicked the luminous forests of Lysaria. In between, earth crops grew in perfectly maintained traditional conditions. "Remarkable," breathed Dr. Chen, recording readings on her tablet. "We're not just growing food, we're proving that life can flourish anywhere if given the right support." She paused, watching a group of Vrek youngsters carefully tending to plants alongside human children from the local school. "And some things grow beyond our expectations." The changes weren't limited to Earth. Reports came in regularly from colonies and outposts across the galaxy where the Miller method was being implemented. The approach wasn't just about farming techniques. It represented a fundamental shift in how species could interact and learn from each other. Aurora, now Earth's official ambassador to the Lysari Confederation, had developed a particular interest in documenting these changes. "Thomas," she said, her English now nearly perfect, "the Council wants to establish similar research stations on 12 more worlds. They're calling it the Seeds of Peace Initiative." Thomas rubbed his chin thoughtfully, watching as a Vrek engineer demonstrated their latest irrigation innovation to a group of fascinated human farmers. Mighty fine name for it. Though I suspect peace was always there, just waiting for the right conditions to grow. The festival reached its peak with a feast that celebrated the collaboration of all three species. Human comfort foods sat alongside Lysari light-based nutrients and Vrek frozen delicacies. Sheriff Martinez, now promoted to head of Interstellar Security Coordination, raised her glass in a toast. "To Thomas Miller," she announced, "who taught us all that the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or a spaceship, it's understanding how to help things grow." As the celebration continued, Thomas found a quiet moment to walk his fields with Aurora. The alien who had crashed into his life had become like a daughter to him, her presence filling a void he hadn't realized was there since his own children moved away. "Did you ever imagine," he asked her, "when you were running from those wreck ships that you'd end up here? That we'd all end up here?" Aurora's scales rippled with emotion. "Never imagined survival," she admitted. "But you showed everyone, that's survival not enough. Must thrive, must grow, must help others grow too." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent call from the communication center they'd set up in Thomas's old barn. A new signal was coming in, from deep space, from a direction where no known civilization existed. The message, when decoded, stunned everyone. Another species, one that had been watching from afar, had witnessed the transformation that began on Thomas's farm. They had seen former enemies become allies, seen how different species could work together instead of fighting. Now they wanted to make contact. "Well," Thomas said, adjusting his worn cap, "guess we better make sure we've got enough coffee for our new guests." The news spread quickly through the festival, but instead of fear or uncertainty, there was excitement. In just 6 months, they had all learned that diversity brought strength, that different perspectives led to better solutions, and that there was always room for more at the table. Dr. Chen hurried over with her latest analysis. "The signal patterns suggest a photosynthetic species," she reported excitedly. "They might have completely different approaches to agriculture that we haven't even considered." Thomas smiled, watching as humans, Lysari, and Vrek immediately began preparing for their new visitors. The Vrek were already discussing modifications to the greenhouse to accommodate potential new environmental needs. The Lysari were analyzing the signal for cultural markers, and humans were doing what they did best, getting ready to make newcomers feel welcome. "You know what this means?" Aurora asked, her scales glowing with anticipation. "Your farm, it's becoming more than research station. It's becoming a seed," Thomas finished for her. "A seed for something bigger than any of us. And like any good seed, all it needs is the right care to grow into something wonderful." As the sun set on the harvest festival, casting golden light across the fields where 3 species worked as one, Thomas Miller felt a deep satisfaction. He had spent his life nurturing things that grew, but he never imagined he would help grow peace among the stars. New buildings were already rising alongside his old barn, combining the best of multiple worlds' architecture and technology. Yet at its heart, this place remained what it had always been, a farm where life was cultivated, where understanding was harvested, and where hope grew stronger with each passing season. 1 year to the day since Aurora's crash landing, Thomas's farm had become unrecognizable, yet somehow remained exactly the same at its heart. The arrival of the photosynthetic Solarians, as they came to be known, had added another extraordinary chapter to an already remarkable story. The Solarians were a species that literally drew life from starlight, their crystalline bodies refracting light in mesmerizing patterns. They brought with them knowledge of solar farming that revolutionized energy production across all known worlds. Yet they too found themselves learning from Thomas's simple wisdom about nurturing growth and fostering connections. You see, Thomas explained to a group of shimmering Solarian visitors as they toured his original cornfield, farming isn't just about making things grow. It's about understanding the connections between all living things. Each plant, each creature, each person, or being, has their part to play. The farm had expanded far beyond its original boundaries, but Thomas insisted on maintaining that first field exactly as it had always been. Keeps us grounded, he would say with a wink. Reminds us where all this started. The Vrek, once feared as merciless conquerors, had become the galaxy's leading experts in sustainable cold climate agriculture. Their natural precision and attention to detail, once directed toward warfare, now made them exceptional caretakers of delicate ecosystem balance. The very traits that had made them formidable enemies now made them invaluable allies in the fight against hunger across the stars. One morning, as Thomas supervised the installation of a new Solarian light harvesting system, he received unexpected visitors. His own children, who had been too busy with their city lives to visit for years, had finally come to see what their father had built. "Dad," his daughter Sarah whispered, tears in her eyes as she watched Vrek children playing with Lizari youngsters in the shadow of a Solarian energy tower. "This is incredible. Why didn't you tell us?" Thomas shrugged, leaning on his well-worn walking stick. "Some things you have to see to believe, sweetheart. Besides, I figured you'd come when the time was right. Like a seed, can't rush it, just got to trust it'll sprout when it's ready." The presence of his children added another layer of joy to the farm's atmosphere. They brought with them their own expertise, Sarah's environmental law knowledge and Michael's architectural skills, which soon found their place in the expanding interstellar cooperation. Aurora, watching the family reunion from a distance, felt her scales glow with happiness. "Your children, they have your heart," she observed to Thomas later. "They see beyond surface, like you." The farm's success had sparked similar projects across the galaxy. Miller stations, as they came to be known, were being established on various worlds, each adapting his principles to local conditions and cultures. But everyone agreed there was something special about the original, something in the soil of that Montana farm that had first taught enemies to become friends. One evening, as multiple suns set in a sky now crowded with ships and stations, Thomas sat in his favorite rocking chair on the porch. Around him, the night shift was beginning, Vrek tending to their cold climate crops, Solarians harvesting stellar energy, Lizari monitoring the light-sensitive plants, and humans overseeing it all with their characteristic adaptability. "You know what's funny?" he said to Aurora, who had taken to joining him for these evening reflections. "All my life, I thought I was just a simple farmer. Turns out I was practicing for something bigger than I could have ever imagined." A commotion from the communication center interrupted their conversation. Another signal, another species reaching out after observing the success of the farm. This had become almost routine now. Every few months, a new civilization would make contact, drawn by the growing legend of the place where peace had taken root. "More guests," Thomas chuckled, slowly rising from his chair. "Better tell the Vrek to expand that new greenhouse they're building, and ask the Solarians if they can adjust their light towers to accommodate another species' needs." The farm hummed with activity as preparations began again. But this time, Thomas noticed something different. He didn't need to give many instructions anymore. Humans, Vrek, Lizari, and Solarians moved in perfect coordination, each knowing their role in welcoming newcomers to their extraordinary community. Dr. Chen, now heading the Interstellar Agricultural Research Institute headquartered at the farm, summed it up best. "We're not just growing food anymore, Thomas. We're growing the future." As Thomas looked out over his transformed farm, he remembered something his father had told him long ago. "Son, good farming is about leaving the soil better than you found it." Looking at the thriving interstellar community that had sprung from his simple farm, he reckoned he'd done just that, not just for his own small piece of Earth, but for the entire galaxy. The old farmer smiled, knowing that long after he was gone, the seeds he had planted, of peace, understanding, and cooperation, would continue to grow among the stars. And that, he figured, was the finest harvest any farmer could hope for. 5 years after Aurora's crash landing, Thomas Miller celebrated his 78th birthday under a sky filled with the ships of a dozen different species. The celebration took place in the original farmhouse kitchen, though the building now stood at the heart of what had become known as the Galactic Agricultural and Peace Center. "Make a wish, Thomas," Aurora encouraged as she helped him blow out the candles on a cake that somehow incorporated elements from all the resident species' culinary traditions. The room was crowded with an impossible family: humans, Lizari, Vrek, Solarians, and representatives from the newer species that had joined their community. "Already got everything I could wish for," Thomas replied, his eyes twinkling, "though I wouldn't mind one more good harvest." The gathered beings laughed, having learned that with Thomas, everything came back to farming somehow, but they also understood the deeper truth in his words. Every new connection, every shared discovery, every moment of understanding between different species was its own kind of harvest. That evening, as the celebrations continued outside, Thomas received an unexpected honor. The Galactic Council, a governing body that had formed in the wake of the peace that started on his farm, had made a unanimous decision. "We're naming it the Thomas Miller Principle," Dr. Chen announced, her voice thick with emotion. "The idea that peaceful cooperation and mutual understanding can be cultivated like crops, with patience, wisdom, and care. It's becoming the foundation of all interspecies relations." Thomas shook his head modestly. "Seems like an awful fancy name for something my daddy taught me before I could walk, that everything worth having needs proper tending." But the impact of his simple wisdom couldn't be denied. The latest reports showed that conflict between spacefaring species had dropped to historic lows. Trade routes that once required military escorts now saw ships from former enemy species protecting each other. And countless worlds were being transformed from barren rocks to flourishing gardens using the combined agricultural knowledge of multiple civilizations. As Thomas walked through his farm that night, supported by Aurora on one side and his daughter Sarah on the other, he passed countless examples of how far they'd come. The original greenhouse, where they'd first proved different species could grow crops together, had spawned a network of climate-controlled biodomes that stretched to the horizon. Each one was a testament to cooperation: Vrek cooling systems, Lizari light manipulation, Solarian energy collection, and human agricultural techniques, all working in perfect harmony. "Listen," Thomas said suddenly, stopping their walk. In the evening quiet, they could hear it, the sound of children's laughter. Not just human children, but the young of every species, playing together in the fields where Thomas had once grown corn alone. "That right there," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "that's the finest crop I've ever grown." The next morning, Thomas rose before dawn, just as he had every day of his farming life. But as he stepped onto his porch, he found he wasn't alone. Representatives from every species had gathered, waiting to accompany him on his morning rounds. "Thought we might learn something new," the Vrek agricultural chief explained, mandibles clicking in what everyone now recognized as affection. As they walked the fields together, Thomas shared stories of his early farming days, back when the idea of alien visitors would have seemed like science fiction. Each tale carried lessons that transcended species, about patience, about respect for the land, about the importance of understanding natural cycles. Near midday, they reached the spot where Aurora's ship had crashed 5 years ago. The impact crater had been preserved, surrounded now by a garden that incorporated plants from every known inhabited world. "You know what amazes me most?" Thomas said, looking at the diverse group around him. "How the universe works. Sometimes the best things grow from what seems like disaster. Aurora's crash could have been the start of a war. Instead, it became the seed of something beautiful." As if to emphasize his words, a new signal came through from the communications center. Another civilization, reaching out after observing the peace and prosperity that had spread from this small Montana farm. "Well," Thomas said with a familiar twinkle in his eye, "guess we'd better prepare the welcome wagon. Aurora, would you mind putting on a fresh pot of coffee?" The group laughed, knowing that coffee diplomacy had become as much a part of their success as any advanced technology. Thomas's simple hospitality extended first to a crashed alien refugee and then to her pursuers had created a template for interstellar peace that no one could have predicted. As the sun set on another day at what had become the most important farm in the galaxy, Thomas sat in his rocking chair on the porch. Around him, the evening shift changed, beings from across the cosmos working together in harmony, tending to crops that would feed worlds he'd never dreamed of visiting. "You know," he said to Aurora, who still joined him every evening, "farming teaches you that everything's connected. Every plant, every creature, every drop of rain and beam of sunlight. Guess that's true for the whole universe too. We just needed to learn how to tend those connections right." Aurora's scales shimmered with agreement. "You taught Galaxy greatest lesson, Thomas. Not how to grow food, how to grow peace." Thomas Miller, the farmer who had changed the fate of not just one alien race, but of all known spacefaring species, smiled contentedly. He knew that long after he was gone, the seeds he had planted would continue to grow, spreading hope and harmony across the stars. And that, he reckoned, was the finest legacy any farmer could leave behind.